Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Tischman Auditorium at the University Center. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Van Zandt, and I'm the president of the New School. Tonight is a culmination of a full days of activities showcasing the ways we're thinking about climate change here at the New School. I'm pleased to welcome our special guests tonight, Rhea Suh and DJ Spooky. You'll hear more about them and from them in the next few minutes. I also want to thank two deans, Dean Joel Towers and Dean Michelle DePass, for all the work they've put into putting the entire day together, and also on our climate change task force. They've been responsible for guiding the university in terms of what we've been doing. I think it's also been this has been a great year in terms of our own leadership, the New School's leadership position on climate change. As many of you know, we announced not too long ago a multi-part plan. The New York Times felt it was good enough to put a feature article on, which I'm very proud of. And I think the reason was that we came at it in a somewhat different way. Yes, we did. One leg of it was to divest from some fossil fuel stocks. But that's just one part of it, and frankly, that's symbolic in many ways, and I'm very proud of both that, but also the other things we've done. The second leg on that stool was in our academic programming in terms of both what we teach in the curriculum. In fact, last year Parsons kicked off in their first year curriculum, the first required sustainable systems course. And we're looking to expand that through the rest of the curriculum, as well as encouraging research in this area of climate change. At the end of the day, I think the solutions to climate change are really a question of designing social practices, social policies to, frankly, alter human behavior, whether it's behavior by companies, behavior by individuals, behavior by all sorts of other organizations. Another element of our plan is to continue and increase our community outreach. We already do a number of projects here in the New York City region, as well as outside even the U.S. I visited one of our water projects, international field projects down in Buenos Aires, where we're helping clean up the Matanza River there. So I'm particularly proud of the way we've reached out and done that. And finally, it's our own internal operational commitment to doing something about climate change. We can tell other people what to do and give them good advice, but we need to walk the walk that reflects the talk that we have. So I think I'm very proud of that. You are in a LEED Gold building right now, and this building has a whole range of systems that allow us to monitor usage as well as reduce usage of power, usage of water, as well as production of refuse. Frankly, we have work to do in some of our other buildings on campus, which are a little older than this and need to be retrofitted to be more sustainable. But I think it's something internally as a community we commit to, and not just from the facility standpoint, but also from the behavioral standpoint. And we're going to be asking our students, our faculty, and our staff to make a mark in terms of those three things: energy reduction, use of energy, reduce that, reduction of refuse, as well as reduction of water use. That's sort of our plan. Again, I'm very proud of it. It's been something, frankly, that's also has a knock-on effect that I may not have anticipated, but we've been welcoming hundreds of prospective students here over the past couple of weeks, both in master's programs and undergraduate programs, as well as in different parts of the country. And I think our climate change plan has generated a lot of interest, and I think it's excited a lot of the students who are thinking about coming here. So I think that's been sort of a positive consequence of what we've done. All right, well, let me stop there, other than to say that we have so many people within the community dedicated to climate change, whether it's students, fantastic faculty, or staff. They all, I think, deserve a real thank you. But let me now pass it on to Dean Michelle DePass. She is the dean of the Milano School, Michelle is a national leader on sustainability, environmental policy, in particular social justice around environmental policy. She was formerly an assistant director at the EPA, as well as at the Ford Foundation. And I think most important in today's context, the context of today's program, is she is the new director of the Tishman Environment and Design Center. She has brought new energy to that center. I think she's also brought a clear sense of mission and direction. And she also has that unusual sense of dedication to promoting and supporting the work of her colleagues and the students that participate in that. So, Michelle, please come on up.
Hello, good evening. So I've been opening up amazing events all day, and from the morning when I said good morning and happy Earth Day, and I got a response, and now this is the culminating event, so I really want to hear good evening. Good evening. Thank you. All right, and so this is the culminating event for our fantastic symposium we had all day to celebrate Earth Day, and in my history as an environmental professional, I've celebrated a lot of Earth Days, but I have to tell you, this one has been the most fun because it has been about relaunching our commitment university-wide. It involves upwards of 14,000 people. So it's just a very special opportunity, and I'm glad that I can celebrate it all with you here. As President Van Zandt said earlier, welcome to Earth Matters, Designing Our Future, and we're honored to have you. And other great publications such as Time Out and the New York Times Magazine recognize the New School as the place to gather on the 45th anniversary of Earth Day. And that's a pretty auspicious opportunity for us. On this day in 1970, the environmental message from the mayor of New York, it was Mayor Lindsay, was to be more tidy. He tried. It was a start. And you know, Earth Day has started in New York City with thousands of people gathering in Central Park. But you contrast that to earlier today with Mayor de Blasio stating that you cannot have environmental sustainability without economic sustainability. Now that is the core of our question and our mandate for the future. So the perceptions of this wicked problem of climate change are ever expanding. And as this issue becomes more complex, we know that the key to solving climate change will not be found in one task, one discipline, or one way of thinking. That's where we come in. So the interdisciplinary nature of the New School, combined with our commitment to social justice, puts us in a unique position to respond to the climate question. The Tischman Environment and Design Center, or as we affectionately call it, TEDC, is at the heart of the university's environmental philosophy. Since its inception in 2005, TEDC has launched the Interdisciplinary Undergraduate Environmental Studies program, which has supported faculty environmental research and has offered various public programming. But in the past year, we've been planning an expansion of TEDC's reach and mission with a goal of looking to use the New School's strengths in design, policy, and social justice to develop solutions on climate change here on campus and our local and regional and national and even international community. We now have over 30 affiliated faculty from Milano, Parsons, Lang, NSPE, and NSSR, with interests ranging from sustainable design, environmental policy, the economics of climate change, environmental justice, urban ecology, architecture, and we could go on. We're honored to have affiliated faculty that led our panel discussions and workshops all day today, where we had hundreds of students, faculty, and greater community members join us on campus for sustainable talks. We're also designing campus and community research and practice projects for students. which specifically focus on deep engagement with underserved urban communities to foster climate justice, with our corporate partners who are synergistic with our mission, and government partners who are concerned with the development of more sustainable cities. Students are at the core of our work, and TEDC is working with university faculty to create the courses, the studios, the practicums to train students to address critical climate change issues and other environmental threats to community well-being and social justice. Finally, through our premier initiative, Renew School Project 14K, TEDC will be funding a portfolio of projects reflective of our mission to support bold, innovative, community-engaged research across disciplines and schools at the New School. These projects range from the exploration of sustainable fashion design, the role of civil society to address climate change, the synergistic efforts of climate change and social deprivation on health vulnerability and resilience of urban areas, and behavioral economic solutions to climate risks. These projects are among the first of many projects that the Center will support as part of our commitment to contribute to our understanding of solutions and to create solutions to some of the most pressing environmental issues of our time. So as you can see, we've been busy, and it's only the beginning. So we're excited for today's event. I wanted to lay some groundwork of what you'll be seeing in the future and how this evening's event particularly embodies the power of TEDC working as a university center with all of you in the span of our work. You're going to hear from experts in respective fields, students, academics, musicians, all taking their part in addressing climate change. So with that, I'd like to introduce my partner in so much, Joel Towers. We're doing something special tonight. We've asked for modest but resonant introductions because I could stand up here for a long time introducing Joel. But I will just say that Joel Towers' 10-year-old daughter calls him a tree hugger and a windmill lover, and he loves this. Welcome, Joel Towers.
It's true. It's totally true. Yeah, we decided, you can read everything you need to about all of us tonight in various different formats, both in the program here and on the internet. So we wanted to use one-sentence introductions, and that was mine, and it's very true. So I love Earth Day. I'm really glad to be here. I have 3 responsibilities this evening. The first is I'm supposed to say something interesting and controversial in 1 minute, and we're practiced at that because our president, David Van Zandt, has us do these 1-minute lectures at Alumni Day in May. So we've been like, we're good at these 1-minute talks. So I'm going to do, yeah, I always go over, it's true. So there you go. So I got to do that. My second task is I'm going to introduce DJ Spooky in a moment. And then I will moderate a discussion after he has presented some of his thoughts, and I will moderate a discussion among DJ Spooky, Tanya Kalmanovitch, and Colleen Macklin, after which time we will have a special presentation, and then Rhea Suh will present. So I have 1 minute to say something to you about Earth Day and what we're doing here at the New School, and I wanted to spend that minute asking you to think about the fact that the majority leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, has declared a war on coal, or he's declared that President Obama has declared a war on coal. And I wanted to mention that to you because it seems to me the question we face right now is the climate we are in, the climate for change, and what that means about climate change. So what does it mean when the leader of the Senate can declare that the president has declared a war on coal? Is this, in fact, a representation of the climate in which we are working? Or is this the final act of an old world order that's on its way out? I think it's the latter, but I'm not convinced that we don't have a lot of work to do to make sure that is the case. So what does it mean to call the president's attempt to reasonably, through the EPA and the Clean Air Act, to attempt to control emissions from carbon plants and to have a major political figure see that as a war? What is it to use the language of war to describe these efforts? Clearly, it's about short-term job protection. It's about the protection of certain kinds of industries. But it is in so many ways an indication that we are still addicted to a certain kind of energy regime, that the work that it takes to make change will require of all of us significant commitment to no longer be enslaved to the past in order to free our future. This language of war is extreme, and the fact that it hasn't been called out as extreme says that we have a tremendous amount of work to do. The fact that that argument, that a war on coal can even be understood in those terms, when the moral consequences of not making change are so significant, that we, this many years into Earth Day, this many years into environmental movement, this many years into the successes that we have had, still have a tremendous amount to do. I think it is absolutely crazy that people could see this as a war on coal rather than our inability to make change as a war on all of us and our future. That's where the language has to be. That's the change that has to be made. We have an opportunity and a responsibility to make sure that we are not captives of the past, and I think that the look from history back at this moment will prove that this notion that we are somehow at war for coal, which, by the way, most of us in the environmental movement have no problem with coal. We just want to leave it in the ground. It's not a problem with coal. Okay, 1 minute. I went over 1 minute. But think about that. Think about that, okay? And you know, one of the things about, and even DJ Spooky gave me a one sentence, it's actually 2 sentences, introduction, which I'm gonna read in a second. But think about that when you, if you don't know his book, you should know his book, and if you haven't bought his book, you're gonna have to get in line to buy it because they have to reprint it, it's been so popular. But he reminded me the other day when we were talking that Antarctica is the only continent that doesn't have a government. And that's a really interesting thing, and so he's going to talk more about that. But DJ Spooky, who is known to all of you, but in his 1 sentence, 2 sentences, he describes himself as someone who creates multimedia performances that raise awareness about sustainability, climate change, global culture, and the role of technology in society. He expands the essence of DJ culture, recombining information to offer new perspectives that bring modern relevance to these issues. It is an honor, a pleasure, to welcome to this stage DJ Spooky.
I'm going to begin here and then slip over there. What an absolute pleasure and honor it is to hear not only these perspectives of how an academic context has really been able to both engage and actually have the sense of praxis, you know, with putting, as the president of the school said, talking the talk and walking the walk. We're in an LEED building, which stands for Leaders in Energy and Design and so on. And these are things that I think are going to be resonant with how we as artists, as creatives, and as the young people of this generation and this century begin to really see the unfolding of climate change in real time. So what I want to do tonight is open up a couple issues. Behind me, you have a photograph of some material that I was working on. This is an album cover. People still make albums, by the way. And it's a project I did in Antarctica. I took a studio to Antarctica a little while ago, years, you know, time. And what ended up happening is I really fought the sense of how does someone from the urban context go to the most remote parts of the planet and still make electronic music. You know, hip hop, techno, dubstep. There's not exactly too many people breakdancing in Antarctica, you know. So I was trying as much as possible to hit the reset button on my creative processes. So I carried a studio and a backpack, went to these huge ice fields and set up and then tried to figure out some other creative processes. So with that said and done, I'm going to move from the podium to the turntables. Here we go. All right, so what you're seeing here is a kind of a tension between two projects. And now one of them is set in Antarctica, and the other is set on my hard drive. What you're seeing here is a couple of things. One, this is my mom in the late 60s. She grew up in Washington, D.C. If anybody is from D.C., I grew up at hey, somebody, all right. I grew up in D.C. During the era of Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover. I was not born just yet, but my mom had a store called Toast and Strawberries, which was at DuPont Circle at Connecticut and R. Anybody been to DuPont? And what ended up happening is I grew up in a sort of political household, and my dad was dean of Howard University's law school in the late 60s, so I'll just give you a little bit of biographic. And by the way, this is on purpose. Forget PowerPoint, all right? All right, so this is our living room in the late 60s. That's Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. That's my dad in the tux, and one of the ambassadors from Ghana, the ambassador from Kenya, and the other Supreme Court Justice, Douglas. So they would come to our living room and have a beer every once in a while. Or at that point, maybe champagne, because they were wearing tuxes. So DC in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a tremendous amount of political upheaval. Nixon, J. Edgar Hoover, the after effects of Martin Luther King's assassination, and above all, this funny, quirky thing that Nixon ended up doing, which was setting up our areas of what you call the EPA, which is, people tend to forget Nixon was one of the founders of the EPA. Now, my household was always one of debate and discussion. And I was always kind of raised with this idea that we should question some of the common values and always make sure to try, and by questioning them, make them stronger. So let's go back in time to two things. One, this is my current book. It just came out on MIT. I publish books about art and technology. This one's called The Imaginary App. And I'm going to tie this to the book that Joel so kindly mentioned. It's actually sold out. So I'm going to present an element of this and tie it into apps and design. So apps. Every time you touch an app, you're essentially touching a metaphor. And the reason I'm doing my entire discussion from an iPad is that essentially we're looking at mobile media as inheriting many of the issues that physical objects gave us in the 20th century. So if we go back over to a couple other areas, we can call this Moore's Law of Computing meets Grandmaster Flash. You guys, this is what my normal DJ shows, so you guys are getting the artsy mix today. And in fact, I was just in Australia. All these Australian girls were throwing their bras on stage. So, you know, this is very PC today, right? All right. So the whole pun here is that DJ culture is about these kinds of interconnected issues. And I was looking at the turntable as a metaphor that inherited some of the issues that recorded media had engaged in the 20th century and had evolved into multimedia in the 21st. So if you think about what an app is, it's a meta tool. It can be almost anything. And it can be an instrument. It can be a data visualization tool. It can be a graph, a calendar, a violin, you know, a cello. So what I ended up doing was thinking more about the instruments of learning how to learn about these instruments. So it's kind of a meta of meta, like sort of hall of mirrors. So my journey into this book began not in Antarctica, but at the National Cryptologic Museum. And this is a museum right next to the NSA, so nobody goes there. If you're ever driving near Fort Meade, you'll see a big black cube. Do not go in there. It's the NSA. But next to the NSA is this crazy museum that has the history of the US military's encryption devices. And so World War II set the tone for our modern digital era. And I want to go back in time to a couple people that, this all goes back to Antarctica, by the way. I haven't lost Antarctica there. This is a gentleman by the name of Alan Turing, and I begin my book called Tuning Turing's Cathedral. During World War II, the Allies were very far behind the Germans in terms of math and encryption, and they needed to commission someone to figure out how to crack this device called the Enigma device. There's actually a movie called The Imitation Game where Benedict Cumberbatch plays Alan Turing. Brilliant mathematician, crippled and hobbled by the social mores of his time. Now, how does this work with climate, and how does it work with Earth Day? So he's considered to be the inventor or the father of modern computing. And one of the most complex phenomena facing Earth Day and facing our climate justice system and so on is how we think of modeling the climate. In fact, many people say that computers are being helpful with looking at how to distill the complexity of climate change into things that people can understand. So computers are very good mirrors to hold up to this data. Another person that figures prominently in my new book is Norbert Wiener. He coined the term cybernetics, and he's considered to be one of the major figures for thinking about information theory and the way information can be applied to social patterns. So, last but not least, one of the other people that's a big influence, and I'm going to go back to Antarctica, is this idea of graphic design. This is a gentleman named Alex Steinweiss. He invented the record cover sleeve. In the 1920s, considering we're here at a school focused on design, he said, look, why don't we put an image on the record cover sleeve and give people an idea of what the song sounds like? So you can imagine, by the way, this is the very first record cover sleeve. It's from the mid-20s. He walked into Columbia Records and said, look, let's put an image on the cover. And that created a revolution in graphic design that lingers with us to this day, on the idea of the mass production of images. So if we dial it out and go here, you can easily see apps have inherited the same graphic design component. Graphics being tools to enable us to navigate through what you call the graphic user interface on computers. So when I was working on my book, I ended up figuring, let's see how that would figure into data. So whenever you see a piece of ice, you're actually seeing a very specific mathematics at work. You're seeing a hexagonal form and in permutation over and over and over. It's called recursion, or sort of a fractal dimension. And once that piece of ice becomes a storm or becomes a kind of a continent like Antarctica, you're actually seeing how that becomes passive but also incredibly powerful agent in changing the entire planet's relationship to temperature, to air quality, and so many other things. And in fact, if you go to Antarctica and dig into the ice, you'll see that every couple meters there's different layers of history. So the ice is kind of a metronome, a clock that is telling us geology and geologic and kind of all sorts of other information. So permutation, science, but with hip hop, you know, I got to get to that. Black people, we love ice. You know, you got Ice T, Ice Cube. If you got the white guy, you got Vanilla Ice. You know, so this is Iceberg Slim, and it was interesting to do a little bit of research on the sociology and the poetry of environmental stuff because I wanted to figure out how would I translate that into a digital media composition. So I ended up in Antarctica, like I said, for about 6 weeks with a backpack, and was looking at all the way the devastation that was occurring, but taking that devastation and applying it to temperature differentials. And was doing photography of these sort of devastated landscapes. This eventually was at the Metropolitan Museum. And intriguingly enough, these are huge boulders of ice that have shattered and fallen off these glacier fields. And you have to be very careful walking around this stuff because it can collapse, and if you die, basically. And by the way, being half Jamaican, falling in an ice water is not my way of going out. You know, it's really... So I was trying to figure out how we translate this into a composition kids in the city would get. Because a lot of Americans either A, don't even have a passport, and B, barely leave where their cities are from. So translating this idea of the urban context to one of the most remote parts of the planet really was trying to bridge two different aesthetics. So what ends up happening is this is some of the temperature data I collected, and this is what it looks like transcribed into music compositions. And this is what it looks like when you think of it as what you call algorithmic musical transcription. So what you're going to hear a little bit later is motifs and elements generated by the ice fields. And the Book of Ice was a graphic design project that regretfully we're sold out of every single freaking copy, which is good for me, I guess. But I wanted everybody to be able to check it out. Let me show you the book. So what happens, by the way, you can download it. If you go to iTunes, no problem. Save the paper. So each section of the book is where I went in the geography, and I was trying to figure out, again, a digital media portrait, an acoustic portrait of climate change. And so these are some of the areas I visited, and was generating compositions based on geography and, above all, temperature, which, of course, is part of the basis of climate change. I ended up working with the United Nations to collect data from their temperature and all sorts of other variables that go into the causes of climate change, and then assign those mathematically to music motifs and elements. So, being able to take that, each section of the book has QR codes and hidden media that take you to different websites, that take you to the data that was used to generate the composition. You click, and you go into the book both as a digital media file and as a physical book. You can scan it with your phone as well. And was thinking about the mathematics of ice. So these are all bits and pieces of the math that gets translated into the composition. So that's an app. So when you think about a graphic design project, you have to imagine people have to think of it visually, but let's dimensionalize that, and that's where interdisciplinarity comes into play. Your average person in the 20th century would experience digital media as a flat surface, a paper, a book, a painting. But in the 21st century, we're now in a very dimensionalized relationship to how we think of information. Information is not still or dead. What I want to do today is not only think about the Book of Ice as a sort of a template, but something that says, look, we know that climate change is happening. It's hard to argue with a storm that just smashed your house. And if we think about these kinds of global weather patterns and other things and phenomena that are happening, artists are going to be very critical to helping raise awareness and to catalyze people in ways that you can argue the glass is half full or half empty. Try doing that to a Republican senator like Ted Cruz. But maybe his kids are listening to hip hop. Who knows? I don't know. But at the end of the day, my motto for that project was that I wanted to say the imagination is the ultimate renewable resource. And we have to think about giving people better tools to think about the process of creativity, compassion, and above all, common sense. And that's where I think design, whether it be for physical objects or design for new ideas, that's where the arts come into play even more powerfully than ever. So I'm going to wrap up by saying this is what eventually I would normally be doing for Earth Day. I just want to show you a quick image of Earth Day DJ style. Here we go. So that's me DJing about 200,000 people. At the same place where Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech. And that's normal Earth Day, DJing, yo, everybody, what's up? And basically, I would be DJing. That project was all the sounds of Antarctica, and I made it into beats like hip hop and techno and stuff like that. And it was me and this band, The Flaming Lips. So if you haven't heard of them, check them out. But that whole album is released as an open source initiative because nobody owns the ice. If you go to djspooky.com, you can download it for free, and just don't tell my publisher. I'll leave it at that. All right, so I have to wrap up, and I just hope they gave you guys a little bit of an overview of the two current books, and I just want to say thank you so much for giving me 10 minutes of opportunity to convey some of these ideas. Thank you. All right.
Sure, and I'm going to bring up two more people to join us for this conversation. Tanya Kalmanovitch and Colleen Macklin. They've each given me one sentences as well. Come on up, guys. Colleen Macklin, who sat down next to DJ Spooky. And when somebody gives you one sentence, you got to make sure you get every word right. So here you go. Colleen Macklin believes games are a great way to figure out how serious issues and complex systems work and to have fun in the process. Colleen. And Tanya Kalmanovitch, performer, scholar. Tanya Kalmanovitch is an associate professor at Manus. Her entrepreneurship programs help Manus musicians prepare for artistic careers that make a difference in a changing world. So this is our panel for tonight, and we're going to have 20 minutes to solve the world's problems. I want to start, though, DJ Spooky, with the last thing you said, which is imagination is the ultimate renewable resource, right? And in a lot of ways, you and Colleen and Tanya have each been working outside of what had been maybe like a normal kind of practice, but you're still deep within your space, right? You're still working within the music, you're still working within imagery and design, and yet you're seeking to make change. You're seeking to enable people to make change, to communicate that, to use imagination in ways that get us all going beyond changing a light bulb, right? So talk a little bit more about what inspires you to do that. Where is the music coming from, the history of the environment? How do you get into that space?
Changing a light bulb is actually really complex. Whenever I see a light bulb, I think of Thomas Edison. And Thomas Edison, as we all know, the inventor of the light bulb, the inventor of modern early cinema, also, of course, direct current. And if you go to his house, the light bulbs still work, the same light bulbs from several hundred, but he built in planned obsolescence into everybody else's light bulbs because you had to keep buying them more and more and more. Thomas Edison was sort of a gangster inventor. I tend to love Tesla, and we're just catching up to Tesla. It's kind of an interesting thing because Tesla was, very much an advocate of wireless electricity, which we're now beginning to use for cell phones, using all sorts of other green materials like tapping the Earth's electromagnetic field, all sorts of very creative use of electricity that would have saved us 100 years of bad design. But because he wasn't gangsta enough, Edison had a bitter relationship to him. It kind of crushed him. So I think there's so many amazing thinkers that were never given the right moment. And I think that's where the arts can actually open up these hidden areas where people, how should I put this? Like the cultural capital of the arts is really more powerful than ever. And that's precisely because of the web and the way that things can spread more quickly and you can't have somebody crush an idea. So when I said in my book, the imagination is the ultimate renewable resource, there's the phrase, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. And I think that climate change is one of those things where we've passed the tipping point for a lot of stuff. I don't want to be too grim. But we're going to have to not just look at resilience, but how do storms and radically changed weather patterns affect architecture, design, use of electricity. I remember I live in Tribeca and our electricity was out for several weeks, but we could have had solar and other sort of things to be much more robust. And New York is so many bad building codes, little things. So anyway, that's my take on that. I do think that half the battle is a good soundbite. The Republicans have no good soundbites, so that's.
But they have a war on coal.
But they have more money. That's the problem.
But you're this is a really good segue, Colleen, to something you've been working on, which is that seeing climate change, in a sense, it's not just as the great challenge that it is of the 21st century, but an opportunity to use that imperative that we change, that we build the kind of energy and the urgency of change into and through games, and you've used it as a way of communicating and working with people around the world through games. Tell us about it.
Well, I think it's pretty interesting being sandwiched between two very musical people, because games are probably closer to music than they are any other medium out there. They really are also where, as we've seen through DJ Spooky's explorations into algorithms and recursion, they're where math and emotion collide, right? The logic of rules, the logic of a game exists, but when we play with those rules, we experience all kinds of things on an emotional level, even as spectators of whatever your favorite sport team is. We're experiencing the kind of emotions and the triumph of the team that wins and the sadness when your team doesn't. So one of the most important things as a game designer is really figuring out what kind of failure do you want to design, right? Because games are all about failing. The only way we can learn how to play a game, especially a video game, is to fail over and over and over again. Whether it's Tetris or playing, Super Mario, you're constantly learning by failing. You're learning how the world works by failing. So games provide this sort of safe space for us to fail within. And I think one of the reasons they're powerful, and not to mention, they've been around since before written language. We have found ancient Mesopotamian dice, six-sided dice, that are the same kind of design that you use in today's Monopoly board game. So they're really old technology. But I think one of the reasons that they're really important is that they remind us how to fail, how to learn from failure, and how to keep playing, how to kind of keep trying to do things. And we've seen, obviously, the failures of our system. I would say games are also the pop cultural form of systems. They let you mess around with something, the moving parts, the dynamics, the elements. It gives you feedback, positive and negative feedback, and really kind of gives you an understanding of things within the sort of safe, kind of candy-coated shell of the game, where the consequences aren't obviously as harmful as they can be in the real world. But a lot of the work I've been doing with the Red Cross, designing games for disaster preparedness, that in areas where climate change is hitting really hard right now, and some of the other work around making games for social change, really focuses on how do we make those failures really interesting and make them into something that people talk about and then begin to apply to their own lives and to the quote-unquote real world. So I would say we probably need to think about artful failure as an opportunity for solving some of the problems we face today.
You're also communicating complexity through games, right? You're sort of, and that's part of what happens, and so are you, in a way. You're kind of bringing this complex story into, in a way you're trying to communicating through imagery, through music, about very complex set of changes in both cases, right?
Yeah, I would say game designers kind of do the opposite of an information designer, someone who would take complex ideas and turn them into something that we can grasp by looking at it. I think game designers try to create something very simple set of rules. Fling the bird, to topple the houses of the pigs. Those poor pigs. But by creating simple rules, they're basically generating so much complexity. You know, when you play a game, there can be multiple strategies. We still haven't figured out all of the strategies in an ancient game like chess. There are more moves than the number of atoms in the observable universe in a game of chess. So you're taking something very simple and then looking at all the possibilities that emanate.
But and in the same context, I mean, I love this idea of a very simple set of rules. You know, like say for example, hip hop's 4/4 tempo within a very specific tempo sounding and a certain minor chord, major chord. Rock is 4/5. You know, blues. You know, these are all very specific rule sets. But as we move further into the 21st century and this idea of the quantified self, you're going to be seeing a lot more people looking at the data generated by movement, the Apple Watch, whatever, you know, and how that relates to almost every aspect of how people look at burning calories, staying healthy, things like that. And I love the fact, I walked here from Tribeca, and I'm always walking and thinking about how much time people spend sitting, for example, versus the standing desk. Or for that matter, why don't we think about encouraging people to be more active? And there's clubs now in Holland where the dancing of the people in the club generates the electricity, which I thought was kind of a cool innovation because it becomes a sustainable feedback loop between the beats. If there's no beats, there's no electricity. If there's no electricity, there's no party, right? Try that at Burning Man, you know, who knows? But there's always that sense of like, let's try this out. And I think that's where having some simple rules really generates extreme complexity.
Let me bring Tanya into this. We were talking before about practice. Both in the musical sense and in the practice sense of doing things in the world, and how your practice in a way builds a bridge between music and social movements. And I think that connects this conversation. Tell us something about that.
Yeah, it's funny, I feel like I'm a little bit of the Luddite in the room because my instrument is a very old piece of technology. I play generally unamplified. You know, it's a box with some strings and a stick with some hair on it. And I rub one against the next, and I can do an infinite array of shades and colors of emotion. And so I was thinking about this, like, what is music in this context? And I thought, well, music is an old technology that is enormously effective at making feelings, making emotion, making memory, making complex configurations of culture sensible, palpable, workable. And so when I think about what we're doing with our students at Manus and what I feel this really heavily, this sense of how does this training and this discipline prepare our students to become not just ready for what comes next, but to become active and engaged leaders in better ways to respond to what comes next. And what does music have to do with that? It's funny, classical music is a little bit of a conservative field, right? So I was thinking that conservatism, and maybe this is going to sound radical in this room, but conservatism has its values. It's like yin and yang, you know, unbridled liberalism. Whoa, I'm going to go there. Unbridled liberalism ends up in Zuccotti Park, I suppose. Unbridled conservatism ends up in, well, I'm Canadian, so I better back off of a discussion of American politics. But I was thinking about that tension between what happens in coming back to the same space and the same practice day after day after day, which is essential to our identities as performers of instruments. And I thought that above all, it's a practice of cultivating presence. Presence to the self, presence to the repertoire, presence to your ever-shifting sense of self. And what do we ask of our audiences when we play? What do we offer? More than anything, I suppose, is a chance to be present to themselves, to their own relationship to the soundscape that unfolds. So I came to this little formulation when I was thinking about what I do in relationship to what happens at TEDC, that music is a form of environmental design, emotional environmental design. So what I encourage my students to do, in short, just to tie that up, because I rambled a little bit, was to connect what they know from their practice room, from their personal practice, to every other aspect of their lives, and to connect that to these biggest issues that we're facing together.
So hold that thought for a second, because I'm wanting to, we started a little late, and I want to make sure we have a special event about to happen. But Tanya, one of the things, and we all talked about this beforehand, is that, I feel like we live in a time, to bring this back to the Earth Day question, to the challenges that we face, in which there is a need to use our work to help establish and understand the urgency of the moment that we are in, right? The biggest challenge with climate change in many ways is that it seems far off, but we know it's not. And yet there is a disconnect between actions, and there's a willingness to perpetuate certain kinds of practices that constrain the future in ways that is both irresponsible and quite dangerous, but that there's this opportunity to do things differently. But it requires a kind of urgency, it requires an agency, it requires the energy to happen around, that dance floor, or through the ways in which we communicate and learn through games and through music, tell stories about the time we're in. So one of the challenges I gave to all of us on the panel is, there isn't a single person in this room that doesn't believe that Earth Day matters, that climate change is happening, and that we don't have to get moving and do stuff about it, right? This is not a group of people that came here skeptical. So how do we help this group and ourselves move forward? What are the actions we take in your work, with students and at Manus, with students at Parsons, in the world of Antarctica and music, and help these people move forward. Help us all move forward. What do you want to say? You get to go first, Tanya.
All right. Well, I would say that kind of attention and listening that music cultivates so deeply is the opposite of denial. And so the challenge that I would give to my students is to move music away from the margins of these uncomfortable major issues. So if there is a very human element, and maybe everyone in the room here is sold that this is happening, but there's a lot of people in my life. I grew up in northern Alberta, which is also the opposite of being here pretty much, where the Keystone Pipeline is supposed to start. When I grew up, I wanted to be a musician because it was the absolute opposite of that oil-soaked land. So I grew up seeing that degradation of my environment in Fort McMurray, and I wanted to be a musician because that had nothing to do with oil. And when I was 14 years old, I thought, I'm going to play music, and I'm going to go to Juilliard one day, and I'm going to do this because it's nothing like where I come from, and it's the opposite. And the big challenge that I faced in myself was to move music away from the margin, away from that polarity, and put it right in the center of climate change. And that's a challenge, I suppose, that I would offer to any of my students and anyone here. I think we might all have areas in our life where we're holding separations, and maybe to dash those barriers down.
Look at the center. Colleen?
Yeah, I think, so David Foster Wallace, the novelist responsible for that really thick book, Infinite Jest, which has all those footnotes, said once, I'm going to paraphrase, the role of the author is not to sort of be smart and write about how smart they are or express their smartness through their writing. It's really to remind the reader of how smart they are inherently. And as a game designer, that is one of the most apparent things. When you're designing a game, the first thing you do is, even on paper, if you're designing a video game, you start in the simplest way on paper, put it in front of someone and have them play test it and see what happens. And you realize all of a sudden that all of us think differently, that we're all very different. We come from different backgrounds, we come from different places, but ultimately we all are smart in our own way. So I try to live that as a teacher, and not to, think that I'm the smartest one in the room, but to create a platform where everyone can remember how smart they are, how able they are at solving problems, at getting over failure, and ultimately succeeding. So I would say just don't worry, it's not all on your shoulders. But if you can create an environment where everyone can express their thoughts and intelligence, then that's a great step.
In the 19th century, there was a really funny phrase from Goethe who he says, architecture is nothing but frozen music. I want to reverse engineer that to say music is nothing but liquid architecture. We have to think of new structures, new patterns. And there's a lot of people who've been doing, cognitive studies right now, and there's a term that's going around with all my friends who are neural cognitive scientists, specialists, everyone's talking about neural plasticity. So the brain can change, and we can digest new information that shows you an underlying realm of difference. So for example, if you're Galileo or Copernicus, or for that matter, there's so many other scientists who looked at things and said, look, the world does not, the sun doesn't revolve around the earth, and you could get killed for that. That if you're Johannes Kepler or Galileo, you almost were killed. And then one day everyone wakes up and says, hey, this is totally wrong. We need to reframe our whole, kind of situation. So I love the idea that ideas can change society. And I don't feel that that this is totally, in fact, a ripe time for that. And I do think that we need to really help catalyze that moment. And any tool is available. But I do think that right now we're seeing a gap of literacy. We're seeing a gap where there's been a tremendous amount of misinformation, tremendous amount of sort of fog, and like sort of if just people are uncertain. And what allows people to move forward more confidently is better information. So we have to learn how to learn. And that's something that's really important as we move further into the 21st century. Many people are complacent. There's a degree of resignation. There's a degree of sense that, this is too big, it's too complicated, it's in the distance. And what gives people that sense of immediacy? Imagine, this is a metaphor I'll wrap up with. The Koch brothers are seeing a frog in a boiling pot of water. The Koch brothers were like, we can add some oil to the flames there, It's and the frog, if it hears the right music, might jump out of that. Otherwise, it's just going to wait till the water gets hotter and hotter. There's a very famous metaphor of like the water's boiling. But I could just imagine the two Koch brothers like sort of saying, I've met one of them, amusingly enough, and you feel like you're sitting across from someone who's like, how are you going to even communicate with this human being? And it's difficult. I'll leave it at that.
So we have communication, even in difficult situations, and I think the clarity that the future and the markets of the future lie in this is one of the things we have to try to communicate even in those difficult situations. But communication, human intelligence, and music in the middle. I'll use the moderator's prerogative to add one piece to that, and that because I think also want to bring it down into kind of real, like, what can you do to make change, in your lives? And I think one of the key things for us at the Tishman Environment Design Center at New School is to really make a link between these things you care about, environment, climate, and a socially just world. I mean, that was what Michelle was talking about at the beginning, and I think she's spot on about that, is that you can make that link between things that are maybe not obvious at first, that they are connected, but they are so integral to each other. I mean, you are all making these links. And so if you can go out into the world and say, what can I do that is both socially just and advances a more environmentally resilient future, a sane future, and bring those things together in actions, that's the future we need, and those are actions we can all take. So that's what I would hope for, all of us and all of you. And I'm going to thank Tanya and Colleen and DJ Spooky for their thoughts tonight, and give them all a round of applause. And I'm going to ask DJ Spooky to introduce this last beautiful piece of this portion of the event.
Christine and Amos from the Mannes School of Music. And they're going to play some compositions that were written based on some of the expeditions to Antarctica and to the Arctic Circle. So thank you guys so much. If we can just give them a little bit of a hand. Thanks. So what you're going to be hearing, I want to just do one. I mean, I'm relentless about information. Sorry about that. It's probably I inherited from my dad. So one of the fun parts about this is you're going to hear one of my favorite composers, John Cage, wrote a piece called Imaginary Landscape. And in 1939, you went into a room and there was record players and radios playing loops and frequencies, and the audience said, "Hey, where's the band?" You know, and people were pissed off. But he was like, "Hey, I'm Buddhist. You know, deal with it." 2015 marks the 100th anniversary of these guys. The gentleman on the left, his name is Luigi Russolo. He wrote this book called The Art of Noise. And it's considered to be one of the first manifestos thinking about how to deal with art, sound, and above all, patterns. So that's considered to be the first sound system. And in 1915, this was original punk rock. People threw bottles at them and said, "Hey, where's the band?" You know, it was totally... and so he played a noise as a way of thinking about new form. And the 20th century, one could argue, is a tension between rhythm and noise. So we're going to start. This first piece is called Check Your Math. And what they're going to do is play a riff or two based on two things. One, this one. And this is based on mathematician and moral philosopher Adam Smith, who wrote an essay called Of Water and Diamonds. And he basically was trying to do the math of why water, which is essential to life and is part of the basic foundation of our body, we're over 90% of water, by the way, versus diamonds, which are totally useless and you can't eat or you can't do anything with. Why is the value of one versus the other so discrepant? And so this piece is called Check Your Math, and it's all the motifs and elements are taken from these kinds of issues. By the way, this is me hanging out with a lot of penguins. Penguins smell terrible, by the way. And I noticed when I was in Antarctica taking photography and doing stuff that people couldn't get it until they saw the sense of scale. So that sense of the human in the landscape is what I'd love for you guys to take away tonight. And this first piece, Check Your Math, if you guys want to play the first riff, and then I'm going to kind of go into it. You guys ready? So what you guys were just hearing was essentially riffs and motifs, elements and bits and pieces, loops and layers. So when I was working on the book of Ice project, I wanted as much as possible to think of the graphic design. So the musicians are playing notated material that's written out in a way that, straight ahead notes, 16th note, 8th note, A sharp, B flat, and so on. But the graphic design components are about loops and layers. So, say for example, the material they're playing is essentially kinds of elements taken from math and algorithms, but what I would do when I was at a museum or gallery show is this kind of graphic treatment. So we had this premiere at both Sundance, Robert Redford hosted, that's him looking very confused. You walked into the exhibition and all the monitors had different kinds of ice melting, and it made a series of electronic music that it was a sound installation piece. And he was like, how do you make music out of ice? So what you were just hearing was different kinds of data distilled. All the electronic sounds were taken from the Book of Ice. And my app, by the way, I develop iPad apps, and the app you were just seeing lets you DJ from your iPad and control video as well. And we've had over 14 million downloads of it. It's free. And everything I'm talking about is either on iTunes or freely available from my website. So this next piece is called Of Water and Ice. So say, for example, if you happen to be, just wanting to check out something, imagine the turntable is something where you can essentially have all the songs, millions and millions of elements available at your fingertips while you're DJing. And I no longer have to carry a crate of records around anymore, by the way. And so the whole idea is these are traditional instruments that have a tremendous amount of history behind them. And their tuning systems versus mine from the urban context of hip-hop, techno, dubstep, and so on, all converges with this idea that the role of the composer is evolving. So this last piece is called Of Water and Ice. And I just want to do a quick scratch routine to show you, just to give you an idea, because I'm not going to do it live except for editing loops. And so say, for example, I want to call up James Brown, because I love James Brown. And here's a remix of James Brown, really quick. And I'll just go, James Brown! 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, It's pretty addictive. Sorry, yeah, so I'm not sure which mic is going here, but either way, it's pretty addictive. So if you have access to millions of songs and you can loop, layer, take elements, so say for example, if I want to do this. Sorry, it's like I said, you start getting into it, right? So you'd be at a party, everybody's rocking, and you can just pull up any beat or any element that you have in iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, any of the major platforms. That means you have access to millions and millions of songs and bits and pieces of those songs if you want to edit them. So it makes DJing both easier on one hand. Even my mom is now DJing with her cell phone. But it also means you have access to millions and millions and millions of bits and pieces and motifs. So I wanted to make a tool that would work for other DJs, and so like Dropbox or Evernote, so like I said earlier, we've had over 14 million downloads of it, and that gave me access to thinking about not only graphic design and the graphic user interface of the turntable, but what that means for a composer in the 21st century. So this next piece is called Of Water and Ice, and the motifs are taken from the geometry of ice, and this piece premiered, it was commissioned with Ai Weiwei, who's a very renowned Chinese artist, and we had it premiere in Guangzhou. I'll just show you this really quickly. And when I work on projects, basically, we had this premiere, like I said, at Guangzhou Biennale. That's me with the same hat I'm wearing today. We projected ice throughout the exhibition, and we had these huge cranes with different screens, so when you walked in front of the museum, you would see different kinds of patterns of the ice melting. and that we had about 10,000 people come to the opening. But Ai Weiwei couldn't show up because he was in jail in China, you know. And what ended up happening is we stayed in touch, and this piece has been performed at many different venues. And today is kind of just a fun update. So when you see this, think of the sounds you're hearing. You guys want to play the riff for a second? So that was the Madison Ensemble. Thank you guys so much. Hey, awesome. So I believe that's the next panel. All right, thank you guys. And by way of one last little thing, everything I was playing tonight is available for free because nobody owns the ice. And it's all open source, what you call free culture, freeware. So feel free to remix Antarctica anytime. There we go. Thanks.
Thank you. That was an amazing performance. I feel very lucky to be here tonight and very honored to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Rhea Suh. My name is Catherine Willis, and I'm a final semester graduate student in Environmental Policy and Sustainability Management here at the Milano School. That was our dean. At the Milano School and in the New School, I've also served as the treasurer for our Sustainable Cities Club, which is a great student-led organization. And through the Sustainable Cities Club, or SCC, I worked on our campaign to divest the New School's endowment from fossil fuels, which I'm very proud of. We protested that to uphold our new school mission, we had to divest. And we collaborated with the Advisory Committee on Investor Responsibility, our university senates, and the Responsible Endowments Coalition to challenge the status quo. And we critically engaged students from across the university to get them involved. In January, President Van Zandt announced that the New School would divest from fossil fuels as part of our climate action plan. So I'm very excited about that, and excited that our Tischman Environment and Design Center is taking the helm to keep this momentum going for positive change. Rhea Suh is also a leader for positive change in her role as the president of the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, a leading nonprofit group that protects people's health. Oops, hold on one second. Protects people's health, preserves wild places, and fosters vibrant communities. Almost 1 year ago, NRDC partnered with BlackRock and FTSE Group, a global stock market index provider, to launch the groundbreaking X-Fossil Fuels Index Series, which excludes companies linked to the exploration, ownership, or extraction of carbon-based fossil fuel reserves. This innovative tool creates opportunities for universities, foundations, and other groups to invest fossil-free. Before joining NRDC, Suh served as the Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget at the U.S. Department of the Interior. She led several cross-cutting initiatives on federal land conservation, climate adaptation, international affairs, and youth programs. She was also instrumental in launching a complex reorganization of the agency responsible for offshore oil and gas oversight in the midst of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Prior to her appointment to the Department of the Interior, Suh worked at the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, where she created and managed a $200 million program dedicated to environmental conservation and clean energy in the West. From 1998 through 2007, Suh worked at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, designing its highly effective clean energy and climate change initiative and leading the creation of the Great Bear Rainforest. Suh graduated from Barnard College and earned a Master's of Education, Administration, Planning, and Social Policy from Harvard University. Please join me in welcoming Rhea Suh.
Very lovely introduction, Catherine. Thank you so much. And I personally wanted to just thank you for being such a tremendous student leader here at the New School. It's nice to be part of organizations that are truly putting our money where our mouth is. So thank you for leading that up. I also want to just give a shout out to my very good friend, Michelle DePass. Michelle and I have been through the trenches on more things than you can possibly imagine. And I can tell you from personal experience, this woman is incredible, and you are very, very lucky to have her as your leader. It is truly a pleasure to celebrate this Earth Day with all of you. You know, there's an old joke that everybody talks about the weather, but no one does anything about it. Well, it's nice to be here when we are facing a moment where our climate is changing dramatically. And yet, I want to applaud you all for doing something about it, for divesting from fossil fuels, for investing in clean energy, for marching in our history's largest climate protest in New York, and for reshaping your entire curriculum to focus on climate change and sustainability. It's now impossible to graduate from the New School without thinking critically about these issues. That's an example, I think, that every other college in this country should follow. We need your creativity and your forward thinking now more than ever. I was born actually just a few weeks before America celebrated the very first Earth Day, when millions of people throughout the country came together, and right here, a couple blocks away in Union Square, to demand clean air, clean water, and the protection of our planet. Like everybody in this room today, I have benefited from the tremendous progress that advocacy unleashed. And I have learned that determined people can create a better life for themselves and for their communities. So a lot has changed since that first Earth Day, including the Earth itself. Scientists calculate that the average global temperatures have risen about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit since the 19th century, with most of that increase occurring in just the last 4 decades. All of the years of the 21st century so far have ranked among the 15 warmest on record. And 2014, well, it was the hottest ever. Those temperature changes have caused sea levels to rise, glaciers to melt, and extreme weather to become routine. Reminders of this new reality are all around us. New York is still rebuilding from Hurricane Sandy, the worst natural disaster in recent history. California is in the middle of a historic drought with lakes and rivers all across the state dried up. If we don't act quickly and boldly, normal weather will become extinct. Fortunately, one thing that has not changed since that first Earth Day is the power of Americans from all walks of life to create a better world for future generations. When our predecessors gathered 45 years ago on that first Earth Day, they were joining a very proud American tradition that dates back hundreds of years, taking a stand for what they believed in. At the turn of the 20th century, President Teddy Roosevelt established one of the most audacious land and wildlife protections the world had ever seen, creating national parks, game reserves, over 150 national forests, and new federal agencies to oversee them all. And when Congress threatened to reverse those efforts, President Roosevelt was supported by a growing movement of people, rich and poor, soldiers and scientists, who shared a love of this land and believed government had a responsibility to protect it. 70 years later, another diverse coalition of Americans, Republicans and Democrats, farmers and city dwellers, gathered on Earth Day to change our country for the better once more. And a couple months later, Congress authorized the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency with huge bipartisan support. You see, each time our country has faced ecological catastrophe, previous generations of Americans have risen to the occasion. They pushed for the passage of the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. They stepped up in the 70s and the 80s to stop acid rain. Now it's our turn. This generation faces our greatest environmental challenge yet. And once again, our success will depend on empowering average Americans from all walks of life to come together and to press for change. We need to expand our reach and engage more Americans by going to them rather than expecting them to come to us. In order to succeed, the environmental movement has to be bigger and broader than just a movement of the left. As Michelle mentioned today, Mayor de Blasio, in a statement around environmental protections, said that environmental sustainability and economic sustainability have to walk hand in hand. He also said that some of my brothers and sisters, quote, in the environmental movement don't get that yet. Well, I'm here to say that we need to. We must be a movement that includes the poor and those who advocate for the poor, like the communities of West Virginia and the coal country communities in West Virginia, where 300,000 people had their drinking water contaminated by a coal plant last year, or the low-income housing advocates that are stepping up because families can't afford their heating bills anymore. We must be a movement, not just of white Americans, but of Black Americans, Asian Americans, and Latino Americans. All of us must come together to address, again, our generation's greatest challenge. We must be a movement of business, big and small, who are starting to realize what's good for the planet is actually good for the bottom line, who are changing their ways to avoid losing a new generation of environmentally conscious consumers. We must be a movement of red states and blue states, people on the coasts who are weathering hurricanes, and people in the heartland who are experiencing withering drought. We must be a movement that includes every single American, because climate change is an issue that affects us all. We all need to come together to protect the beauty and the vitality of the country. After all, America's legacy of protecting our natural treasures for future generations, that's something that's admired all over the world. In fact, that's part of what attracted my parents to this country. I'm a daughter of immigrants. My parents left Korea in the aftermath of the Korean War with a couple of suitcases and maybe $100 between them. But they had big dreams of a better future. And they actually had a picture of what that dream would look like. It was a picture of the moon over San Francisco Bay. You see, my parents didn't just come to this country for the economic opportunities. They came for the quality of life, for the standard of living that America had achieved. And I'm here today representing one of the most effective environmental organizations because I do not take that standard of living for granted. And I don't think any of us should take that standard of living for granted. The good news is that the progress we've already made has put us on the precipice of doing something big and long-lasting. America now does lead the world in reducing its carbon emissions. More than 35 states have renewable energy targets, and this year, the Obama administration announced historic and heroic standards that drastically reduce carbon pollution. Thanks to the activism of average citizens concerned about fracking in their communities, the federal government has also adopted new standards, and some states have banned fracking altogether. So I believe momentum is on our side. The tide is turning. But make no mistake about it, we're not there yet. There are still plenty of obstacles in our way. Despite the clear judgment of science, there are still a lot who are not convinced that climate change is real. And many of them are in Congress. Some of these people are actually running for president. That's why we can't let up. That's why we must build a movement of mothers, fathers, architects, activists that will take us the distance. And that's where you come in. More than anything else, this movement needs to be a movement of young people. Climate change is the issue that will define your generation, and you will define our future. You are the ones who will write the end of this story. You can become the engineers who can create better solar panels, the architects who build greener buildings, the fashion designers that change the way we wear clothes and the kinds of clothes that we wear. It's actually really very exciting to be surrounded by so many students who are already claiming this issue as your own. Even if you have no idea what you're going to do, the knowledge you've learned here, I hope, will be put to good use. I know I had no idea actually what I was going to do even after I graduated from college. I moved back to my home state of Colorado, where I bought a season ski pass and decided to be a ski bum, which was a big disappointment, I think, to my parents, who had just financed 4 years of college. And I stumbled into the field of environmental policy because I actually kind of got bored of skiing. I picked up the phone book and decided to volunteer for a local politician. And ended up with a job working for my congressman on conservation issues, and I've been doing it ever since. So the point that I'm trying to make with that story is you don't have to know what you're doing now or the role that you're actually going to play in the movement. The important thing is to decide that you want to be a part of it. Does it really matter? I think DJ Spooky actually talked about this. Does it really matter if we switch to energy efficient light bulbs when the atmosphere is changing before our very eyes, right? These things seem so enormous. What difference could we as individuals possibly make? Well, consider the difference that 1 degree Celsius has made on our planet. 1 degree Celsius of temperature change has made on our planet. It's barely perceptible to the human skin, but that 1 degree increase is all it takes to turn America's agricultural heartland into deserts. That 1 degree increase could eliminate fresh water from 1/3 of the world's land surface by 2100 and raise sea levels by 5 or 6 meters. In short, 1 degree is the difference between whether we can live on this planet or not. But here's the good news. When the margin of success and failure is so slim, it also means that one person can make a difference. One student can decide to be informed and passionate about sustainability, and that student can organize a few more students to become motivated about the environment. And those students can lobby their administration so that one school, this school, divests from fossil fuels. That's how change happens. It all starts with the power of one. All it takes is one person to publicly ask a politician what he or she plans to do about climate change. I'd like you to be that person. Be the person who pushes your community to adopt smarter and more sustainable practices. Be the one who challenges myths and false information. Be the one who talks to your neighbors and friends about why this issue matters to you. Be the one who stands up. Be the one who speaks out. Be the one who uses what you've learned at this school to fight for change. Do that, and this 1 degree and your 1 degree will make all the difference to our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhea, so much for that. And let's pretend we're in our living rooms, which which we've been in several times, many, many times. How long have we known each other? It's probably about 15 years or so. And we're growing older and more graceful and more beautiful every day. So I wanted to start out, we have a few minutes to just have a conversation. And I wanted to start out a little bit on reflecting where we are now. Here we are, fresh off our stints of working for the president, out of the environment of the White House and our agencies that were doing fantastic work, where we were insiders. And now we're in different kind of environment. You're in a nonprofit, I'm in academia. We have to think about how we're going to make change on the outside. And I wanted to just have an opportunity to hear some of your reflections on how you're thinking about that an opportunity to bring in a little bit about how you're making sure NRDC is reflective of that in your time at the helm.
Great. What I'd actually love to hear your answers to those very same questions. But I will just say, I'll say two things. Number one, I think it's really important for all of you that are the students in this room, when you think about your careers, to not necessarily think that you're going to just have one career path. And I think over the course of time, we've seen that generationally people do lots of different things within the context of their careers. But the one thing that I have noticed that seems somewhat stagnating is that people stay within their sectors for a lot of their careers. So they're business people, they stay in the for-profit sector, or they're nonprofit people, they stay in the nonprofit sector, or they're government people and they stay in the government sector. I think we need people in the same way that you approach interdisciplinary work here at the New School, that work across sectors, right? We need more of that cross-pollination happening. So I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to work in government. I mean, it was and remains, one of the biggest honors of my life to work for the president. But I'm also really glad that I'm not there anymore. And for me at this point in my life, and really thinking about how change happens, it's somewhat liberating to be out of the constraints that you know so well of government, to be able to actually say what I think. Michelle and I spent a lot of time testifying, and I'd like to joke about how whenever we had to go up onto the Hill, or whenever we had to give a press release or a press conference, we'd write something, 500 people would take a look at it, and by the time we got it back, it didn't say anything anymore. You're supposed to equivocate sometimes when you're a government official. You don't have to do that anymore, certainly at an organization like NRDC. So it's wonderful to be part of this side of the movement.
And I would reflect also, same thing I was going to say, that it's wonderful to have my voice back. People ask, why did who kind of assumed I was going to go to the UN or another level of government, and they said, you know what, I want to spend some time reflecting, learning, and to really use my voice. And so that's liberating. It's fantastically liberating. And so the next topic I wanted to touch upon, I'm getting a phone call. The next topic I wanted to touch upon is the moment that we're in the environmental movement. So we've been at this for a couple of decades, and we've seen a transition. I think right now, even though, as DJ Spooky says, there's a lot of information out there and there's still education that's needed, that there are concrete strategies and people are really thinking about those concrete strategies and putting different sectors together, different groups of people together. And last year was the first year that we have on record that the economy grew globally and carbon emissions were reduced. And the corporate sector is even talking more about efficiencies than costs. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, it was all about costs. How are we going to afford this? So it's a good moment. But I sit here also as a child of immigrants and somebody who has invested in the movement being inclusive, bringing everybody to the table. And even though certain sectors like corporate sector and academia are really talking about it and getting it, how do you see what's your prognosis for the future in terms of the movement really being inclusive? And how's the environmental movement doing in terms of incorporating low-income people and communities of color? I know you believe in it, and I know that this is something NRDC is embracing, and it's something that we are doing social research on here with communities at the New School. But I just wanted to reflect a moment on where we sit and our power to be able to help make this happen. And so what are your thoughts?
So a really rich set of questions. I think we are very much at an inflection point, the precipice of change, of pivoting of new direction for the environmental movement. And I think it's an exciting place to be. And there's lots of choices to be made about the direction of where that goes, where the movement heads. But I'm beginning to see a lot of stars, if you will, that are connected with a constellation that makes me very hopeful. And let me talk a little bit more about that. I want to just, again, take the occasion to maybe just obviously remind everybody, today's Earth Day, right? And for folks that have been alive for as long as I've been alive or Michelle's been alive, I think we've seen kind of ebbs and flows in public sentiment around Earth Day, right? Some Earth Days have just been these fantastic things. I remember in the late 80s, there was just, people were out on the streets. It was a big deal. Are we on an ebb or are we on a flow? And I think it's up to us to determine whether or not it's an ebb and a flow. And I'd like to believe that the trajectory, the direction, the way in which we get more people actually out in the streets, the way we get this to be more salient, to be more resonant with people, is through the connection of community, and it's through the pursuit of equity. That I think those stars are aligning in a way that I think the environmental community has never taken advantage of. And perhaps it's always been there, as Mayor de Blasio actually talked about today. But I think we are making those connections. I think we need to do a lot better job in making those connections and furthering those connections and holding us responsible, accountable to those connections. But I am very, very optimistic about the opportunities that are before us as a movement. But we need to make the proactive choices to realize those opportunities.
Can you talk a little bit about what NRDC is doing around that and working with communities around energy and on the ground?
Sure, I could talk about a number of examples, but let me focus on one, which is our Energy Efficiency for All program, which started just a couple of years ago and is really focused on providing folks who live in affordable housing with the opportunities to benefit from energy efficiency. Energy efficiency had kind of been seen for a very long time as something that we could work with big business on, right? You think about just the aggregate scale of how can you retrofit a bunch of warehouses or a bunch of fleet of cars or whatever it may be. And no one actually ever thought of the affordable housing sector as a similarly leveraged opportunity because nobody, frankly, was really talking to those folks, right? So in looking at really not only the opportunities of scale, of magnitude, of the ability to actually tangibly make a difference in the amount of energy that we were consuming, but more importantly, to make a difference in the lives of people. So folks that live in affordable housing oftentimes spend almost 20% of their income on electricity bills, on their heating and gas, right? 20% of their income. And so providing opportunities to reduce those rates, to reduce the amount of dollars and cents that people had to pay out every month, that actually makes a big difference to people. And we're seeing, again, tangible opportunities, not only at scale, across the board, but resonant opportunities with individuals and the lives of individuals and making those lives not only more sustainable, but more fulfilling.
Yeah, I think energy is a real cusp point in terms of working with communities, also direct emissions. I remember when I was in the state of New Jersey working with communities on doing diesel monitoring, just sort of the basic type of community activist approach, like the Louisiana Bucket Brigade has made, pretty famous, but it's about bringing it back down to the local. And I think those are spaces that you and I really understand. And that's why it's so amazing to have you at the helm of one of our greatest environmental NGOs in the country, really in the world. It's an international NGO. And we're all really hopeful around all of the connections that will be made. So we've had a little bit of time to breathe and be away from Washington, D.C. But we're going into a big election year. And we get the opportunity to participate on the outside. And I often think, if I could have one question, or a suite of questions, that would be posed in the major debates. There's always going to be questions about the economy. There's definitely going to be questions about immigration. So I think we all should push to get questions on the table around environment. What would you love to hear posed as a question that would come out of Donna Brazil's mouth, or Chris Hayes, to the presidential candidates, and why?
I want to answer that question without sounding hugely partisan.
That would be good.
It's a little bit challenging because I think we have an interesting situation on the Republican side of the aisle, where there's obviously a lot of candidates and a lot of clamoring. I would just, it's not even the kind of specific question. I would just like to have them acknowledge that climate is an issue and should be talked about at a presidential level. And I actually think it's going to be challenging to get them to acknowledge that. And that's why in my speech I was saying, every chance we get, we need to hold our elected officials accountable and make it really clear that this issue matters. I don't think they're hearing it enough, but I think it's better than it had been. I think there's more salience than there had been, but there's still a long way to go. So I'd love for, once there are candidates on both sides, for this to be a question that is posed in the national debates. And I would love to see real policy platforms developed by all candidates about what they're planning on doing about this. So far, again, we have a pretty comprehensive sense of obviously what this administration's done. We should hold everybody to that same standard. What are you going to do to further that, right? We're just starting, we're just beginning, so what's your plan? Obviously, if they don't have a plan, I think that's a big problem, but I think it's all of our responsibilities to get them to have a plan.
Mm-hmm. Activism 101. We're really organizers at heart. So I want to actually invite our other featured guest, DJ Spooky, onto the stage so that we could open up for some other questions. Ana Baptista, who is a professor of environmental policy and sustainability management, has been collecting some questions so that we could do some more deep diving. So, the first one is, what would facilitate the transportation of our money, commerce, valuing society to one that values living things and our life systems? So, how do we transform our values based on money and commerce to one that values living things and our life systems? DJ Spooky, I'm going to turn to you first. You've had a few moments to pause.
Sure. I guess my first impression is that we already live in what I call the gift economy. And many people look at informal exchange of all sorts of materials and ideas as a basic fabric of digital media, software, copies, MP3s, Napster, all that stuff comes out of this idea of a gift economy of exchange and openness. And I think that's one of the healthiest things that's come out of the digital media scene. On the other hand, it also helps people sort of optimize and exchange best practices, best skill sets, being able to compare. For example, if the police are saying somebody didn't get killed because the police were killing them, and then they realize, oh, this guy had a camera, And then they'll put it online, and then they realize the police were wrong or were lying. Little fun things like that. Hey, and on the other end of the spectrum, capital, as for the last several centuries, has been so based on this idea of scarcity. And as we move further into a digital economy, there's going to be a tremendous amount of revaluation of how people think of, for lack of a better word, the way we think of value. Everything from Bitcoin to other things are changing the way people think about banking, and that's going to get deeper and weirder. And that's why I was showing Adam Smith's critique of water versus diamonds. It's a very famous essay, Of Water and Diamonds, that goes to the heart of this idea of how do we assign value to nature, and that was something that Adam Smith, when he was writing The Wealth of Nations, which of course all these people like Alan Greenspan or whatever, all these people were running around talking about Ayn Rand, and the libertarians who are like, hey, I don't care if I've made my money, I'm just going to kick everyone in the teeth after I've made my money. There's got to be some new foundation, and I think you're going to be seeing people, the gap between the way we live and the way the laws are written are just moving farther and farther apart. And I have to admit, I'm a big fan of events like Burning Man that give people, there's no currency, and you have to trade, favors, and people eventually establish different forms of exchange, things like that. And this is just the beginning, and it's only 2015, but we have a very short window of time to really think about different approaches. And as an artist, I'm intrigued by that. I think that's the new palette, like the potential of things right now.
I'm going to use moderator's privilege and aim the next question to you, Rhea, because it's actually to you. Someone in the audience says, I think I saw you walk in with a child. Yes, Yumi. She's amazing. I'm at the age and I'm starting to think of starting a family, but I feel like I can't have kids because I don't know if the world will be there for their lifetime. Your thoughts?
Wow.
So that was my child who was here with me earlier, and just a funny story. She came out here and she looked at the screen, and I could just tell what she was thinking. She was so excited to see this big screen, and she was thinking Frozen. I could see Frozen on this big screen, and when she found out it was just me and not Frozen, she left. So, I think having a child is the most optimistic thing a person can do. It truly is. It's a huge decision, and in some ways some sacrifice, but it is, again, the most optimistic thing that you can do. And I am optimistic. I mean, I work at an organization day in and day out. We churn out the risks, the analysis, the facts of what is happening to our planet. And yet, I do think momentum is on our side. It's not just the science that's on our side. I think momentum is on our side. I think we all instinctively know what's right. And we've just somehow lost the connection to it. And it relates to the last question. So, I can't give whoever asked that question direct advice about what you should do with your own life, but I can tell you very heartfeltly that I am enormously optimistic about the directions that we're heading, even when confronted with the challenges that we face.
Thank you for that heartfelt answer. And as a mom of a 2.5-year-old, I couldn't agree more. It's an amazing thing to think about our children in the future being community leaders. And I think that's an amazing sort of optimistic goal that we can all strive towards. So this one goes to the heart of some policy issues. As we watch states outlaw the concept of climate change, how do we see the public and the public sector and the government going back to really working to implement policies to address the environment? I'm going to turn to DJ Spooky first. Yeah.
Well, I think we should have Rhea for president.
All right, yes.
I think, it's like when you do the Scopes monkey trial. I don't know if everybody remembers that. There used to be this thing that you couldn't say that human beings were descended from natural species and other species, then we somehow rose from the forehead of Zeus or something, God knows, whatever religious weirdness. But the funny thing is, I think that that's where anybody who's clever, if it was the right-wing types, they would try and do lawsuits. They'd have the local commerce of, what's it called, the trade of commerce, whatever? Chamber of Commerce. Those guys are very clever with doing lawsuits at a grassroots level to alter policy by the judicial system. And yeah, of course climate, it's like one of the dumbest policy things I've ever heard in my life. It's in Florida, right? The Rick Perry guy, or whatever the guy's, the Republican lunatic. And they're just, there has to be a moment where people say enough's enough. I think in Florida, it's a tragedy that breaks my heart, but you have to imagine they're probably going to be, twistedly enough, affected the worst by all these storms, the worst by all the water levels changing, and you'll still have somebody saying, there is no storm in the middle of a storm or something. It's just like, it's like something out of Grimm's fairy tales or something, like, just unbelievable stupidity. But these people are elected, and they probably have a 7th grade education. And, how do you educate the policy people and be able to... I've had friends at the EPA, and like, Paul, when I give a policy presentation to an elected official, they have a team huddle, and they're like, we have to make it seem as if we're giving a 8th grader a policy presentation. I'm like, she's telling them how to
I hope that wasn't us.
But my God, these guys have kids too, and I'm assuming somebody must have to say, the storm was really intense last month, or something. It blows one's mind, But yeah, that's where lawsuits and more judicial activist stuff, and I think that the right wing is very active, and they have a lot of funding for misinformation and a lot of funding to it's like what the tobacco industry did to delay just so they can maximize and optimize profits for another decade, another 10, 20 years, of cancer and bad health, But if you take the same strategy and apply it to the counter eco-activist crew that want to just throw this huge fog up, they're doing the same thing,
Rhea?
So I actually think we have seen in a relatively short period of time a palpable change in what the denier camp can get away with, right? That it was just a few years ago where you'd see politicians, governors, whomever, stand up and say, well, I'm not a scientist, so, all of this blah, 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 and that somehow justified the enormous scientific consensus on the issue that justified that we just didn't need to do anything about it. Now, you don't hear that anymore because I think advocates have come out so strong against the ridiculous nature of a statement like that they're just embarrassed to say that because we've made them embarrassed to say that. And I wonder if there's not more parallels that we should be drawing as an environmental community from the marriage equality movement in that arc of social transformation, when there just came a time where it was just ridiculous for people to be speaking out against marriage equality, even though obviously it still happens in some places of this country. How do we shift, again, the frame where Americans are like, well, of course climate change exists, of course it's urgent, and of course we need to do something about it. I think we're making progress towards that. I think we're actually, again, this is the reason why I'm optimistic. We're seeing tangible demonstrations of that. When senators go down to the Senate floor and give ridiculous speeches, we're all over them at NRDC. We are all over them. We use our social media. We do it in funny ways. And I think, again, it's creating some momentum that is slowly but surely turning the tide.
Thank you. I'm getting the high sign that we have to wrap up. So I get the distinct pleasure to, first of all, thank you all for being in our audience tonight and for celebrating Earth Day with us. And can I just ask if there's anybody that's been here all day to all of our sessions? Okay, I have. Okay, well, Alexandria and Anna are raising their hands, and this actually gives me an opportunity to thank the team of people that worked to put this event together, this celebration together. We had 4 different events all day. This was really the culmination, and we had an opportunity to look at so many different aspects of what sustainability and climate is about, and tonight was incredibly powerful, and I feel so buoyed knowing that I'm out there with both of you, and our distinguished faculty that have been part of our event, and also the president, who is incredibly supportive of our efforts and taken leadership in our efforts. And a point of personal privilege, I have to thank Alexandria McBride, who is my research assistant, who I recruited her when I met her in a bar in Washington, D.C. But that is a longer story, but who has really helped us in launching this part of today. And yes, I'm going to give you the last word, actually. Both of you the last word, too.
I just want to say that it's such a treasure that Michelle and Rhea, you two are just national treasures. It's a pleasure for me as an artist to realize that in America there is a tremendous amount of introspection, and above all, people are willing and trying to compare notes and come up with some best practices, some best tools for thinking about this stuff. And I do want to say that everyone in the room, if you have a cell phone, turn it on, tweet about it. It's, there's the Earth Matters hashtag, and I tweeted everybody here and the panel as well, Michelle, some of the other folks. Please, just feel free to riff on it.
Spread the word.
And I've been seeing some material, but I'd love to feel like the conversation doesn't need to end as we leave. And people should feel free to tweet questions at us or something. Rhea, you have a kid, but I have a 7 a.m. train, so I can only take so many questions.
All right.
But but please, let's keep it going.
Rhea, do you have any social media that you want to announce, that you want to?
Yeah,
the
my social
conversation?
media guy is right there, and he's all over it.
So it's at Rhea Suh is your Twitter handle. Yes. So we're getting there. We're getting there. This is why we need young people in the movement to help us. And I just wanted to end by giving you both a token of our appreciation here at the New School. This is for Rhea Suh, and this is for DJ Spooky, if you'll pass that down. And so just to tell you all, it's a globe. And it's a crystal globe. And thank you very much. This has been a privilege, an honor, really exciting. And I hope you guys go out and have a great Earth Day evening. Eat some sustainable food, hang out with your friends, take the train, don't drive. Happy Earth Day, and look out for what we're doing in TEDC next. It's really, really exciting, and you're gonna see a lot of stuff. So keep us on your TEDC in terms of your media. And what's our handle, Alexandra? At New School TEDC. There you go. Thank you all. Good night.